My name is Douglas Whitfield. I'm 71 years old, and for the last 38 years I've run a small accounting practice out of a modest office on Bank Street here in Ottawa. To my only son, Nathaniel, I was just a tired old bean counter who wore the same 3 cardigans and drove the same rusting Ford Taurus since the 90s. A man who clipped coupons from the Metro Flyer. A man who, in his words to his father-in-law, one Christmas never amounted to much. My son and his new wife's wealthy Bay Street family believed it completely. I know this because I cut my fishing trip in Algonquin Park short by 2 days and came home on a Tuesday afternoon instead of Thursday. I walked through my own front door in Rockcliffe Park to find my wife Eleanor sitting alone at the bottom of the stairs, her hands pressed against her mouth, weeping so hard her whole body shook. And from the dining room, I could hear laughter. My son was laughing. He was laughing with his father-in-law and his mother-in-law, the 3 of them taking photographs of our walls, our floors, our great room, measuring the window frames my own father had installed back in 1978. They were planning which rooms my wife and I would be moved out of, and which would become their new ensuite. They thought I was finished. They thought I was a harmless old man with nothing left to give. What they didn't know was that the simple old accountant they were about to push into a basement suite was the silent owner of a portfolio that would make their jaws come unhinged. And they didn't know that I'd already walked into my lawyer's office 11 weeks earlier and pulled the pin on the grenade they were now standing on. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where in this beautiful country you're listening from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that in Canada, in 2026, we still owe our elders something more than a bed in a basement. The drive from the park had been quiet. I hadn't called ahead. After 46 years of marriage, there are few pleasures left, like surprising the woman you love on a gray November afternoon. I'd stopped at Farm Boy on the way home and picked up Eleanor's favorite butter tarts, the ones with the raisins she pretends to dislike. I turned my key in the front door, and the warmth of the house hit me, along with the smell of Tim Hortons dark roast and something else. Something expensive and floral that didn't belong in our home. "Elle?" I called out, setting my duffel bag down in the foyer. "Sweetheart, I'm home early." There was no answer. Only the sound of laughter rolling down the hallway from the dining room, and underneath it, a sound that made my chest go cold. A wet, broken sob. I found my wife on the 3rd step of the staircase, still in her housecoat and slippers, even though it was nearly 2 in the afternoon. Her silver hair was unbrushed. Her eyes were swollen red. When she saw me, she didn't move. She just looked up at me like someone who had been drowning in silence for hours and couldn't quite believe a rescue had come. "Doug," she whispered. "Oh my God, Doug, you're not supposed to be back until Thursday." I crossed the foyer in 3 steps and knelt down. "Elle, what's wrong? Sweetheart, who hurt you?" She pressed a shaking hand over her mouth. "Nathaniel, he's here. And her family. They're in the dining room. Doug, they came in with a contractor, a man with a tablet. They've been measuring everything for almost 2 hours. They told me, her voice cracked. "Told you what?" I asked, my voice level. "That we're moving out of our bedroom, that they already spoke to a realtor, that there's a very nice bungalow in a retirement community out in Barrhaven she couldn't finish." I stood up slowly. Every joint in my 61-year-old knees protested, but I barely felt them. I helped Eleanor to her feet, guided her to the living room couch, and draped the wool blanket her mother had knitted us in 1981 around her shoulders. I kissed her forehead. "Stay here, sweetheart," I said. "Just stay right here. I'll be right back." The walk down the hallway to my own dining room felt like the longest walk of my life. I could hear my son clearly now. Nathaniel, 39 years old, director of digital marketing at a firm in Canada, was laughing that high, performative laugh he'd started doing after he married Harper 18 months ago. I heard the clipped, Forest Hill vowels of his mother-in-law, Constance Ashford Delaney, the wife of a downtown Toronto investment banker who'd retired to a penthouse in the Byward market. And I heard Gregory Delaney himself, that low, self-satisfied chuckle of a man who had spent his career moving other people's money, and felt that made him a philosopher. I stopped in the doorway of my own dining room. The scene in front of me was so obscene I almost couldn't process it. My son had his phone out, filming. Harper, my daughter-in-law, was standing on my mother's antique maple dining chair in her stilettos, gesturing at the ceiling molding and saying something about crown treatments. Constance was running her hand along our built-in china cabinet with a look of mild disgust, as if she'd just discovered a stain. Gregory was pouring himself a generous measure of my Glenfiddich 21-year-old, the bottle my partners had given me on my retirement from the firm, into one of Eleanor's crystal tumblers. And on my dining table, spread across the tablecloth my wife had embroidered by hand, was a roll of blueprints. My house. Redrawn. Harper hadn't seen me yet. I mean, look, Mummy, this whole wall between the dining room and the kitchen has to come down. It's criminal. It's 1980s cottage energy. We open this up, we put in a proper scullery, and Nate and I have the open concept we've been dreaming of. Darling, you're absolutely right, Constance said. And the basement suite for Douglas and Eleanor, well, it's actually quite generous, isn't it? There's a 3-piece bath. They'll be very comfortable. Gregory raised his glass. To family looking after family. My son, Nathaniel, my boy, my only child, raised his coffee mug and clinked it against his father-in-law's tumbler. To family. Nathaniel. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through that room like a scalpel. Nathaniel's phone clattered onto the hardwood floor. Harper's head whipped around so fast she nearly lost her balance on the chair. Constance's hand froze on the cabinet. Gregory stopped mid-swallow. Dad. My son's face went white. Dad, what are you? You weren't supposed to be home until... Until what, son? I said quietly. Until the paperwork was done? Until my wife was all moved out of her own bedroom? Harper stepped down from the chair, smoothing her blazer. Her smile was the kind of smile taught at private schools. Douglas, she said warmly, we were going to call you. This is actually perfect. We were just measuring my walls, I said, drinking my whiskey, making my wife cry in her own stairwell. Constance put her hand to her chest in that way wealthy Toronto women do when they want you to believe they're wounded. Now, Douglas, let's not be dramatic. Eleanor is simply overwhelmed. We understand that change is difficult at your age. That's why we came here today. To help. To take the burden off. You've both worked so hard for so long. It's time to let the next generation carry the load. The load, I repeated. This house, Gregory said, swirling his my whiskey, is far too much house for 2 people in their 70s. The maintenance alone. The property taxes in Rockcliffe Park are eating you alive, aren't they, Douglas? Nathaniel's mentioned it to us for years. How you scrape by. How you've had to help him make ends meet. We'd like to reverse that dynamic, permanently. I felt something inside my chest go very, very still. Nathaniel told you I've been scraping by, I said. Well, hasn't he been helping you with expenses? Constance asked innocently. He mentioned that Harper and he send you a little something each month to help cover the hydro and the groceries. Which, is very Canadian of him, very decent. But it's not sustainable. We thought a more permanent arrangement. I turned and looked at my son. Nathaniel couldn't meet my eye. He was staring at the floor, at his phone, at the crown molding. Anywhere but my face. In my entire life, I had never taken $1 from my son. Not one. I had paid off my mortgage in 2004. I had paid for his undergraduate degree at Queen's and his MBA at Rotman out of pocket. I had given him and Harper $50,000 as a down payment gift on their condo in Westboro the day they got engaged. The idea that this boy had sat across dinner tables in a Yorkville restaurant, drinking $100 bottles of wine paid for by Gregory Delaney, and told his in-laws that he was supporting his pensioner parents, it was a lie so ugly and so deep it left me breathless. Nathaniel, I said, look at me. He slowly raised his eyes. And in that moment, I saw something I had never seen on my son's face before. I saw weakness. Pure, undiluted, adult weakness. The weakness of a man who had traded his spine for a seat at a table where he didn't belong. Your mother is crying on the stairs, I said. These people you invited into my home are drinking my whiskey. And you're filming the walls of the house where you grew up so you can show a contractor which ones to tear down. Tell them to leave. Right now. Pick up your phone, tell them to leave, and maybe we can start to fix this. Nathaniel opened his mouth. He looked at Harper, he looked at Constance, he looked at Gregory, and then he straightened his shoulders and did something I will remember until the day I die. He laughed. A small, nervous, dismissive laugh. "Dad, come on," he said. "Don't be like this. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing yourself. This is happening. Harper and I have talked about it. Her parents have talked about it. We're all in agreement. You and Mom are not getting any younger. This house is going to be mine eventually anyway. We're just accelerating the timeline. For everyone's benefit. For everyone's benefit. Dad, you should be thanking us. Most people our age have to put their parents in a home. We're letting you live with us. In the basement. It's a beautiful basement." Harper smiled sympathetically. "We'll even put in a stairlift, Douglas. Eventually. When you need it." Something in me went past rage and out the other side into a kind of crystal clarity. I looked at my son. I looked at the four of them. I took one long, slow breath. "I see," I said. "All right." And then I turned and walked out of my own dining room. I went back to the living room. Eleanor was still on the couch, her blanket pulled tight. I sat down next to her, took her hand, and kissed her wedding ring. "Elle," I said quietly, "get your coat, your real coat, the good one, and put some boots on. We're leaving." "Leaving?" she whispered. "Doug, we're going to a hotel," I said. "And then, first thing tomorrow morning, we're going to a lawyer's office. And I am going to tell you something I should have told you 40 years ago, but I am going to tell you everything tonight. Please, sweetheart, trust me. Just for the next 12 hours, trust me." Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time since I'd walked through the door, her eyes cleared. She nodded. I walked her out of the house and down the front steps. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, Harper behind him, Constance and Gregory crowded in the hallway like spectators at an auction. "Dad!" Nathaniel called after me. "Where are you going? Don't be ridiculous. Dad!" I helped Eleanor into the Taurus. I didn't answer. "You said you wanted to take over?" I said quietly. "To no one and to everyone. So take over." I got in the driver's seat, and I drove us away from the only house either of us had ever owned. I took her to the Chateau Laurier. At the front desk, the night manager, a woman named Helene, who had checked me in perhaps a dozen times over the years, smiled and said, "Mr. Whitfield, it's lovely to see you. Your usual?" Eleanor stared at her, then at me, her mouth slightly open. "The corner suite, please, Helene," I said. "And would you send up a tray? Something hot. Tea, soup, whatever the kitchen can do." In the elevator, Eleanor finally found her voice. Doug, how on earth this room must be $600 a night. We can't—" "Elle," I said gently, "just let me get you upstairs. Let me get some soup into you. And then I am going to tell you the truth about everything, and I am so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." The suite had a view of the Parliament buildings, lit up against the early dark November sky. Eleanor sat on the edge of the sofa, still wearing her good wool coat over her house coat. I poured her a cup of tea from the tray the hotel had sent up, added the 2 sugars she takes, and pressed it into her hands. Then I picked up my phone and I made the most important call of my life. It rang twice. Margaret Okonkwo. "Margaret, it's Douglas." A sharp intake of breath. "Douglas, it's almost 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. You only call me from your personal line when—" "It's time, Margaret." There was a long silence. Then, in the clipped professional voice I'd heard her use in the Supreme Court of Canada, "Are you instructing me, as the executor of the Whitfield Family Trust and your legal counsel of record, to formally activate Clause 9? "I am." "Douglas, you understand this is not a reversible action. He came home today with her parents and measured the walls, Margaret. He told them for the last year that he's been financially supporting me and Eleanor. He laughed at me when I asked him to make them leave. Yes, activate Clause 9. Consider it activated. I need you and Eleanor in my office at 9 tomorrow morning. Osgood, 20th floor. I'll have everything ready. We'll be there." I hung up. Eleanor was staring at me over the rim of her teacup, her hands steady now, her eyes very, very clear. "Douglas Whitfield," she said softly. "Who are you?" I sat down across from her. I took her hands in mine, and I told her the truth I had kept from her for 34 years. I said, do you remember in 1991 when I told you that my accounting practice had done well enough that we could pay off the mortgage? Of course, that wasn't the whole story. In the late 80s, one of my clients was a small software company out of Canada. They were struggling. They couldn't pay my invoices. They asked me if I would accept equity instead. And I did. 6% of the company. I forgot about it for years. In 1999, that company was bought by an American firm. My 6% became a little over 11 million Canadian dollars. Eleanor's teacup trembled. 11 million. I never told you because I was terrified. My father was a steel mill worker in Hamilton, L. He worked until his hands bled, and my mother scrubbed floors in a hospital. And I watched my cousins, the ones whose parents struck it rich in real estate in the 70s, turn into the kind of men who couldn't hold a job, who couldn't stay married, who drank themselves into early graves because they'd never had to be hungry. I looked at our baby son, our Nathaniel, and I swore to God I would not let money ruin him. I went to Margaret Okonkwo, and we set up a family trust. The trust bought this house outright. The trust paid for Nathaniel's schooling. The trust paid for our lives, quietly, invisibly, while I kept working at the practice and kept our lifestyle exactly where it had always been. $11 million, Doug. $37 million now. L. Conservatively managed since 2001 inches a mix of blue-chip dividend stocks, Canadian index funds, GICs, and rental properties in Centertown. Margul has handled it all. I take a modest draw from it every year, just enough to supplement my CPP and OAS, which is why we've always been comfortable but never flashy. And the house? The house belongs to the trust, sweetheart. Not to us personally. We are the lifetime tenants. And Nathaniel? I looked at my wife of 46 years. Nathaniel, I said slowly, was the sole primary beneficiary of that trust. He was going to inherit all of it on our deaths. Until 11 weeks ago. 11 weeks ago? What happened 11 weeks ago? Margaret got a phone call from the general manager at the Bank of Montreal branch that administers the trust's accounts, I said. It seems our son, accompanied by his father-in-law Gregory Delaney and a lawyer from a firm on Bay Street, made an appointment at that branch. They came in with a stack of documents. They petitioned the bank to have me declared mentally incompetent, to have my signing authority over my own trust removed, and to have Nathaniel installed as the emergency conservator of the assets. Eleanor made a sound I will never forget. A small, wounded animal sound. They claimed, I continued, that I had begun displaying signs of early-stage dementia. They submitted an affidavit. They said I was withdrawn, that I wore the same clothes repeatedly, that I drove a car that, quote, no person of sound mind and adequate resources would continue to drive. They said I lived in, quote, irrational austerity, which was, quote, a classic symptom of cognitive decline in elderly males. They asked the bank to freeze my authority and transfer emergency control to Nathaniel. Oh my God. The bank manager has known me for 22 years, El. He called Margaret within an hour. Margaret called me, we had a long talk, and I made a decision. I decided to wait. Wait for what? Wait and see what they did next. Because I couldn't quite believe, I couldn't quite believe my own son had done this. Part of me still hoped it was Gregory Delaney's idea, that Nathaniel had been pressured, that he would come to his senses and come to me and confess. So I waited. I watched. And today, he brought them into our home to cut up the walls. Eleanor was weeping, but her tears were different now. They were the tears of a woman who had just watched something die. Clause 9, she said. Margaret said, Clause 9. Clause 9 of the trust, I said, states that any primary beneficiary who commits an act of financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founders, meaning you and me, is immediately and permanently disinherited. No recourse, no appeal. Margaret designed it as a shield. I never thought I'd have to use it, but today I used it. Nathaniel has just lost the trust. Where does it go? To the contingent beneficiary, who is your sister's daughter, Robin. Eleanor put her hand to her mouth. Robin was my wife's only niece, a 32-year-old palliative care nurse who worked at the Ottawa hospital and who drove out to see us every single Sunday for dinner. Robin, who had sat with Eleanor's mother through 3 days of dying in 2018 and refused to take a break even to shower. Robin, who had shown up at Eleanor's hip surgery and stayed in the hospital for 4 days sleeping in a plastic chair. Robin, who, when Nathaniel had once sneered that she was just a nurse, had just smiled and said, "It's honest work, Nate." Robin inherits everything, I said. The house, the trust, the properties, all of it. As of about 3 o'clock this afternoon, my son has no legal claim to $1 of what he's been counting on his entire adult life. He just doesn't know it yet. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and her eyes hardened into something I had never, in 46 years, seen in them. "Doug," she said, "he tried to have you declared insane." "He did?" "He told those people, those awful, awful people, that we were poor, that he was supporting us, that we were a burden on his life. He did." "Then," my wife said, and her voice was like steel drawn from a forge, "I think we should give him exactly what he came for." I smiled for the first time since I'd walked through our front door. "Elle," I said, "I love you very much." The next morning at 9, Eleanor and I were in Margaret Okonkwo's office on the 20th floor of a glass tower overlooking Confederation Square. Margaret was 62, silver-haired, the daughter of Nigerian immigrants to Winnipeg, a former Crown prosecutor, and the sharpest legal mind I'd ever met. She'd had coffee waiting for us and a stack of documents already tabbed. "Douglas, Eleanor," she said, "I'm going to walk you through what's about to happen, because what you're about to do is both entirely legal and, if I may say so, deeply satisfying." She laid out the plan. We would contact Nathaniel and tell him that Eleanor and I had talked. We were exhausted. We had decided he was right, and we wanted to sign the house over to him this very afternoon. He would be asked to bring Harper, Gregory, and Constance, along with anyone else who had been involved in the discussion, to serve as witnesses. Margaret would prepare a property transfer and assumption of elder care agreement. The document would be thick. It would look official. It would read, on its face, as a straightforward transfer of the house and a formal acceptance by Nathaniel and Harper of responsibility for our care. But on pages 14 through 19, in the small print, each of them by signing, would be attesting to the following: that they, in their own stated view, considered Douglas and Eleanor Whitfield to be in a state of diminished mental and financial capacity, that they had, in the 3 months preceding this signing, taken active steps to have Douglas declared legally incompetent, that they were assuming control of assets and property because, in their judgment, we could no longer manage them ourselves. "Douglas," Margaret said, "it's a signed, witnessed, notarized confession under Ontario's elder abuse statutes and the Criminal Code of Canada. It is sufficient to ground charges of attempted fraud and conspiracy. I can also bring a civil action. And one more thing. Because Gregory Delaney is a registered investment advisor, his signing that document puts his license with the Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization at severe risk." I picked up my phone and called my son. He answered before the first ring finished. "Dad! Dad, oh my God, where are you? Where's Mom? We've been worried sick. We stayed at the house last night just in case you came back. Dad!" I let my voice shake. I let it sound tired, old, defeated. "Nate, son, your mother and I have been up most of the night talking. I called a lawyer's office first thing this morning. We can't fight this, son. We're too tired. You were right. The house is too much. If you and Harper are willing to take it over, to look after the mortgage," I let my voice break slightly, "we'd like to sign it over. Today. Just to get it done. Before I change my mind." The silence on the other end of the line was the sound of pure, naked greed trying to compose itself. "Dad," Nathaniel finally said. "Dad, that's very wise. That's very mature. I'm proud of you. Proud of me." "Come to Margaret Okonkwo's office," I said. "Osgood Tower, 20th floor, 2 o'clock this afternoon. Bring Harper. Bring her parents. I want everyone there who was part of the conversation yesterday. I want it all signed in front of everyone so there's no confusion later." "Absolutely, Dad. Absolutely. We'll be there." I hung up. Eleanor squeezed my hand. Margaret picked up her pen. "Let's get to work," she said. At 1:58 that afternoon, the glass doors of Margaret's boardroom swung open, Nathaniel entered first, in a navy suit I recognized as Hugo Boss, worn with that slight forward lean of a man expecting to sign a deal. Harper followed in a cream-colored pantsuit with a single strand of pearls. Constance Ashford Delaney wore a camel coat and the satisfied expression of a woman at a long-awaited award ceremony. Gregory Delaney came last, briefcase in hand, already scanning the room like it was a meeting he was chairing. "Dad," Nathaniel said, clasping my shoulder warmly. "Mom." He leaned down and kissed Eleanor's cheek. She smiled at him. It was the sweetest, most heartbroken smile I have ever seen from my wife. "Let's all sit down," Margaret said pleasantly. "I've prepared the documents. Given the volume and the importance of what you're signing today, I'll need each of the four of you to initial each page and sign in full at the designated locations. My paralegal, Miss Dubois, is a commissioner of oaths and will notarize each signature. Shall we begin?" Gregory waved his hand magnanimously. "No need to read the whole thing, Nathaniel. I've reviewed enough of these in my career to spot any issue. Standard transfer. Let's get it done." "Of course, Mr. Delaney," Margaret said smoothly. One by one they signed. Nathaniel first, with a hand that was almost trembling in excitement. Harper, with a flourish. Constance, barely glancing at the pages. Gregory, with the practiced scrawl of a man who signed documents all day. 19 pages. 23 initial lines. 4 full signatures. 4 witness notarizations. When the last stamp was pressed onto the final page, Margaret gathered the documents, tapped them neatly on her desk, and set them in a folder. "Wonderful," she said. "Now, before we close the meeting, there are just a few small items of disclosure that my professional obligations require me to share with all parties present." Gregory frowned slightly. "Disclosure?" "Yes," Margaret said. "Firstly, I need to inform you that the house at 42 Birch Crescent in Rockcliffe Park, which you have just assumed ownership of today, is not, and has never been, the personal property of Douglas or Eleanor Whitfield." Harper blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The house is owned by the Whitfield Family Trust, which has been in continuous operation since August of 1991. Douglas and Eleanor have been its lifetime tenants. Only the trust's administrator and current primary beneficiary hold the authority to transfer title. You have just signed a transfer of a property from a seller who does not hold title." Nathaniel's face went gray. "That's Dad. What is she talking about?" "Secondly," Margaret continued, "and this is of greater relevance to you, Nathaniel, on September the 4th of this year, you, together with Mr. Gregory Delaney, retained Feldman and Associates on Bay Street to petition the Bank of Montreal for emergency conservatorship over an account you did not know existed. Specifically, you petitioned to have your father declared mentally incompetent. The bank declined. It then notified me, as trustee of record, in accordance with the trust's internal security protocols." Gregory set his glass of water down very, very carefully. "That petition," Margaret went on, "triggered Clause 9 of the Whitfield Family Trust. Clause 9 stipulates that any primary beneficiary found to have committed an act of financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founders is immediately and permanently disinherited. Your actions of September the 4th activated that clause. Your actions yesterday afternoon, when you entered the Whitfield home with these 3 individuals and attempted to displace your parents to a basement suite, were documented by a property management camera Douglas had installed in the foyer last summer, and they confirmed it." Harper was breathing very quickly. "As of this moment," Margaret said, "Nathaniel Whitfield has no legal or equitable claim to any asset of the Whitfield Family Trust, which currently holds assets of approximately 37 million Canadian dollars. The number dropped into the room like a body into water. Harper made a strange, strangled sound. She tried to stand, swayed, and then sat down very suddenly, her hand gripping the edge of the boardroom table. Nathaniel was shaking his head. "No, no, Dad. This isn't, you don't have $37 million. You drive a Taurus. I was a steelworker's son, Nate," I said quietly. "I drive the Taurus because I like the Taurus." "Thirdly," Margaret said, "and this concerns all 4 of you, the document you have just signed in addition to transferring a property you cannot legally receive, also contains, on pages 14 through 19, a full attestation that you consider Douglas and Eleanor Whitfield to be of diminished mental and financial capacity, and a full confession that you have, in the past 3 months, taken active steps to have Mr. Whitfield declared legally incompetent. Each of you has signed it. Each of your signatures has been notarized. 4 copies have been filed with the Law Society of Ontario, and a 5th has been transmitted this morning to the RCMP's Elder Fraud Unit. Gregory Delaney's face had gone the color of raw oyster. Mr. Delaney, Margaret added, almost kindly, I believe you will be receiving a call from Ciro later this week. A registered investment advisor confessing in writing to an attempted conspiracy to defraud an elderly client of over $30 million. I imagine that's going to raise some eyebrows. Nathaniel stumbled to his feet. Dad, please. I didn't know. I didn't know about any of this. The trust, the money. You didn't need to know, son, I said quietly. All you needed was to be a decent man. And you weren't. If it's not me, he whispered. Who gets it? Who gets the house? The money? Who? There was a soft knock at the boardroom's side door. Margaret nodded. Come in, Robin. The door opened and my niece walked in. She was wearing her Navy hospital scrubs. She'd come straight from a night shift. Her brown hair was in a ponytail. Her eyes were kind but tired and absolutely steady. Hi, Aunt Eleanor. Hi, Uncle Doug. She looked at Nathaniel with a sadness that was far worse than anger. Hi, Nate. Robin? Nathaniel said. Robin, what are you doing here? This is a family matter. Miss Willette, Margaret said, has been the contingent beneficiary of the Whitfield Family Trust since 2016. As of 10 o'clock this morning, she became its sole primary beneficiary. The house is hers. The portfolio is hers. The Centertown rentals are hers. Harper, still pale in her chair, hissed, A nurse. $40 million to a nurse. Robin didn't even look at her. She stepped forward and placed a single white envelope on the boardroom table in front of Nathaniel. Nate, she said softly, this is a formal eviction notice. You and Harper have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings from 42 Birch Crescent. Anything left after Friday at 5 p.m. will be donated to the Ottawa Mission. I'm so sorry, Nate. I really am. Nathaniel collapsed into his chair. He looked at me. Tears were streaming down his face. Dad, please, say something. I'm your son. I'm your son, Dad. I looked at my son for a long time. You're my blood, Nathaniel, I said. But Robin is my family. She's the one who drives 40 minutes every Sunday to have dinner with your mother. She's the one who sat with Grandma Whitfield for 3 days while she was dying. She's the one who calls just to talk. You are my son. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being my family. And I waited and waited and waited for you to come back. And instead, yesterday, you brought a contractor and measured my walls. Gregory Delaney gathered his briefcase with shaking hands. Constance, we're leaving. Now. Sit down, Mr. Delaney, Margaret said pleasantly. We haven't discussed your and your wife's personal exposure in the civil action I'll be filing on Monday, or the Law Society complaints, or the criminal referrals. Please, sit. Have some water. We've only just begun. 6 months later, I sat in my own kitchen, the one with the 1980s cabinets my father-in-law had helped me install, and I read the Morning Ottawa Citizen while Eleanor hummed at the stove. Gregory Delaney had lost his Ciro license in February. Constance had been named in the civil suit and had quietly moved back to a smaller condo in Toronto. Harper had filed for divorce from Nathaniel the day after the eviction, which surprised no one. Her name had, it turned out, always been on a prenup drawn up by Gregory himself, and it protected her assets from Nathaniel, not the other way around. As for my son, he lived in a 1-bedroom rental in Vanier. He'd lost his job at the marketing firm when the story quietly circulated through his professional network. He worked now at a hardware store on Montreal Road, 5 shifts a week, on his feet. And on the first Saturday of every month, he drove out to 42 Birch Crescent in a used Corolla. He mowed the lawn in the summer and shoveled the driveway in the winter. He replaced the storm windows in October. He fixed the leak under the kitchen sink in March. He did not ask for payment. He did not ask to come inside. He did not ask for forgiveness. And every month, as he left, he pressed a small white envelope into my hand. The first one, back in April, had contained $40. The second, $60. This month it was $120. A note inside, in his handwriting, said, "Dad, I know it's not much. I know it will take me the rest of my life. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I'm trying." I sat on my porch after he drove away this morning. Eleanor brought me out a cup of coffee, kissed the top of my head, and went back inside. I held the envelope in my hand. I thought about the son I had raised, the brilliant, charming, weak man I had lost. And I thought about the man who had just driven away in a rusting Corolla, calloused hands, honest sweat on his shirt. I had lost the son I thought I wanted. But in the wreckage of everything, I had found something I had prayed for my whole life. I had found a man who was paying his debts, a man who was learning that character is not something you inherit. It's something you build, one honest envelope at a time. The lesson, I think, is this. Harper and her family understood the price of everything and the value of nothing. They looked at my Taurus and saw poverty. They looked at my cardigan and saw weakness. They looked at a quiet old accountant in Rockcliffe Park and saw prey. But here, in this country, in Canada, the people who built our hospitals and our bridges and our schools and our small businesses were often quiet, cardigan-wearing men and women who drove old cars and never raised their voices. Respect those people. Love them. Honor them. Because when you underestimate a Canadian elder who has watched his country build itself out of nothing, you will find, as my son found, that the mountain you've been climbing all your life belongs to him. What did you think of Nathaniel's long road home? Do you think he earned the right to stand on that porch? And who, in your view, was the real villain of this story? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that in this country our elders are not a burden. They are the foundation everything else is built on.